So, welcome, Dominic. Thank you for joining us today.
Nice of you to have me. It'd be a pleasure to speak to you.
So, for the benefit of anyone watching this video, this is Reverend Domenic Listro. He's an old friend of mine. He's also a mentor of mine. I've known Dominic for close to 20 years now. Dominic was the Reverend of the Ringwood East Victorian Spiritualist Union Church for how long, Dominic?
15 years.
15 years, yep. And whilst you were Reverend there, you were probably involved there 5 days a week, 6 days a week.
Oh, yes, I gave an enormous amount of my time to the church. Happily, I might add. It was a great pleasure for me to do that. So, I had no qualms about giving my time to the church. In a way, it's a way of giving back for what people have taught me. And I felt, in a sense, not obliged, but I wanted to give back, because the VSU has given me, has opened me up spiritually. And I'm not sure that there's any amount of money that you could pay for that sort of change in your life, I'll put it that way.
Yes, the peace it brings you is a treasure that is priceless, isn't it?
Indeed, indeed. And it's the peace that I was after when I first started getting involved. So it certainly brought big changes to my life, yes.
So would you like to just tell us a little bit about your history, how you became involved with spiritualism?
Yeah, it's hard to know where to start with that, because I did have some strange experiences when I was about 20 years old. I had 2 out-of-body experiences within a couple of months of each other, and never happened again. But I remember them very, very clearly. But being young and having other things to do with my life, I never really gave them much thought at the time. I just put them aside. A few years later, when I was married, my wife had always had an interest in spiritualist mediums for some reason, which I won't go into because it gets all too complicated. But I saw my first spiritualist medium, I guess, in my early 20s. And this lady made some predictions which eventually came true. They're quite detailed predictions, I might add. And so that was my first experience of spiritualist medium. And that would have been in my early 20s, and probably, again, being young and having other things to do, I put that to one side and never really thought about it very much. Until probably around the age of 40, I started to think about these things again. And about that time, I started occasionally, and I mean only occasionally, going to the Ringwood East VSU Church in Ringwood East here, just occasionally to keep my wife company. Something that we could do together, basically. And it was through that, because I was having some issues with, shall we say, depression. Not really bad depression, as some people have, but bad enough to want you not to be in that space, and bad enough so that I was literally forced into trying to find a way to get out of this space that I was in. I've been there for about 8 years. I was very fortunate that I had a job that I loved very, very much, and so I used to lose myself in my work. And as I say to people, it's very strange, but it was in those years that I did a lot of my most profound work for my employer. Simply because I found that concentrating on those things helped me not to worry about the dark clouds that I could see in my head. But after 8 years of that, my wife at one point said to me, "You've tried everything." And I've tried reading books and self-help, and I was even on medication at that point. And she said, "Why don't you try meditation?" And I have to say that I laughed at the idea. I did. But about a year later, I realised that there was nothing else left to do. I'd done everything I could possibly do to get my old self back. And so I joined a meditation class. And within 3 months, I have actually been looking at my record of that. Within 3 months, I had some very, very profound experiences in meditation. I was linked into the divine energy, and as you know, if you've had that experience, once you've had that experience, well, your whole world changes.
Nothing else compares, does it?
No, and I keep saying to people, it's very, very hard to put into words what that experience is. You call it bliss. It's more than that, of course. But I did have a problem with that because I know a fair bit about psychology. At the time, I was reading a lot of books on the psychology and the growth of the ego and all that sort of stuff. From, I might add, written by professionals, not just stuff that you find written by people who want to make a fast buck, but these are actually real psychiatrists who are writing these books. So I realised that the mind does have a way of making you believe things that may not necessarily be true.
Yes, yes.
So I had to ask the hard question. As you know, I'm a technologist, and technologists have to deal with some pretty tough things sometimes. You collect data and you might draw conclusions from the data that you've collected. Well, I could not find a way of separating the real world from what was happening in my head. There was always the possibility that what was happening was actually a result of myself wanting to have that happen as a way of getting out of this terrible mess that I was in inside my head. And so the day came when because I could feel all this energy around me, and I knew that I was linked in with what I call now my spirit guides, my friends in the other world. And I said to them, it is very, very difficult for me to accept this philosophy, and you understand what I'm talking about. If you want me to be involved and to accept this philosophy, then you need to be able to provide proof to me at a level that I understand. Having said that, that was a Friday night. The very next Wednesday, when I went to my meditation class, I had a very, very special meditation, which I telling the teacher about at the time. You know, at the end of the meditation, we all say, "How did you go?" Well, I had this wonderful meditation. I've never had it since. It was the only time I had it. I was sitting on a slope of a hill, one tree with a little brook running down the side of the hill, just a very, very tiny little stream. There's all green grass, one tree to provide shade. So I'm sitting underneath the tree. And 2 bright stars appeared. As I was relating this to the lady, she said to me, "Dominic, please stop and come and see me later after we've had a cup of tea." She said to me later that those 2 bright stars were my guides, and that they actually had come to her. And the guides had asked her if she would ask me whether I would like to join their new physical phenomena circle. She said, "Normally, because you haven't been here for very long, we wouldn't ask such a new person to join such a circle. But your guides have asked me, how can I say no to spirit?" So she said, "Would you like to join?" I said, "Yes, of course I would." And it has to be said, I don't know how they organise these things, but from Friday to Wednesday is not all that long. It's only 5 days. And I knew that this thing called physical phenomena existed because people had told me about it in the past. But I had said to them always, "But you saw these things. I didn't. And so until I see these things with my own eyes, forgive me if I'm not quite believing you. So I wanted to see it for myself. So they provided me with the opportunity to do that. And to make a long story short, we did get phenomena, and within 4 months, I had committed myself to the philosophy in what I thought. I didn't know that I was going to become president at the time. I just asked the librarian if she could use an assistant just to help her out, putting the books out on tables and shifting things around. Because in those days, Ringwood East, we just met in a elderly citizen centre, and we had to set up the place every Sunday afternoon and then put everything away. So you're setting up tables, shifting boxes of books around. The lady who was doing that was probably close to 50 years old. I was about 42 at the time, young and strong. And I said, I'm sure you could use some help setting up these tables and shifting boxes of books about. He said, yes, I'd love to have the help. So I became officially part of the Ringwood East community, and because there was no real committee in those times. But within 1.5 years, I was the president. So that's how it happened. And I have to say that I have spent a lot of time in physical phenomena circles. I had my own circle for about eight years. And so for a person like me, it is very, very important to be able to see these things and to convince myself that these things are real, that there is something more, something beyond this physical universe. And physical phenomena did that for me. And then I was able to more readily accept what was happening inside my head. And these wonderful experiences that I was having. And let me say that they happen a lot more in those days than what they do now, because I think they were wanting to get me involved. They've been very, very kind to me.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you asked yourself the question, how can I be sure that these experiences are real, they're not just subjective? That's a very good question to ask, because spirituality and religion and human psychology as a whole is filled with examples of self-fulfilling kind of illusions and ideas where people become interested in an idea and then they have experiences which validate that. So you have to create a connection between the internal world and the external world to actually be convinced. If you're a reasonable, rational person, of course, less rational people will very quickly believe in anything their mind produces for them.
Yes, this is the problem. At the time, I was actually seeing a psychiatrist because I was taking these tablets that she was giving me. Within 3 months of joining that meditation group, I said to her, I had an appointment with her, and she said, "You're looking so much better." And I said, "Yes, I feel quite a lot better." She said, "I would like to go off the medication." And she looked at me and said, "What have you been doing?" So I told her. And she said to me, the spiritual healing bit, yes, you'll find that will only last 1 year. And then you'll have because underneath the problem hasn't changed. You're still the same person. And I thought, oh, okay, well, sounds a bit negative. I said, but all the same, I feel so well, I would like to go off the medication. I said to her, I'm a big boy, I understand these things, I know how to do it. And so she said, okay, you do that, but if there's an issue, you come back. I said to her, with all due respect to you, I said, I hope I never have to come back here again. That's what I'm aiming for. And if I get off the medication, you won't be seeing me again. And I mean, she was a lovely lady. She was very concerned about it. Let's say that. I never have any issues with that. I could see the concern in her face. But the fact of the matter is that within 3 months, I had totally gone off the medication. Totally. And I felt absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Because although the medication helps, and people who hear this need to understand that if you do have this issue, the medication will help you. It has some side effects which are not pleasant, but it does help. So I did very much want to get off them. And when I did get off them, and the world sort of seems such a much brighter place. And yeah, so it is very, very important to test these things. And one further thing that happened, whilst I'm here, and I should mention, because the spiritualist movement is all about mediumship. When you go there on a Sunday afternoon, there's a lot of mediums on platform, and I'd had some wonderful readings from mediums, going all the way back to when I was a youngster. I said when I first went to a spiritualist medium, and every now and then I would get a reading that sort of made you think. Again, it's very, very difficult to quantify these things, and you know, are they just lucky? Because the skeptics will tell you that if you make enough predictions, some of them are bound to come true. And they're all generalised anyway, so you just fit them into your life story, don't you? Well, on the Sunday following, the Sunday when I made my commitment to be part of the VSU, we had two wonderful mediums on platform, and I got a reading from one of them. And the reading was basically, he said to me, I've got this message and I don't understand it. I hope you understand it. And he said, the message is, you've been given the proof that you've asked for. Now get on with it. Now, that sounds like a general statement to make, and you maybe make that statement to maybe a number of people.
It had a very, very particular meaning.
For me, it was profound.
Yes.
Talk about jaw-dropping stuff. And I looked at this fellow and I thought, well, you wanted proof. You've just joined the physical phenomena circle, and you've just experienced some things that have made you commit to this philosophy. Now, all of a sudden, they're giving you the proof of the other side of the philosophy, the mental mediumship. That it is very, very real. So if I needed more proof, so I certainly got it that Sunday afternoon. And I was more than happy to thought to myself, well, I'm a spiritualist now.
Okay. So why don't we talk a little bit about what spiritualism is, how it fits into kind of the worldwide understanding of religion and spirituality as a whole, and what its history is. And I know you know quite a lot about its history.
Yes, I do. And there's a gentleman at Monash University who's actually correlating, putting together all of the history of the VSU. And I went to one of his lectures a few weeks ago. I actually learned a lot from listening to him. Apparently, he and one of his associates are putting together a book on the subject, because you understand that spiritualism involves women quite a bit. Women have a lot to do in our philosophy. They are the main driving force in many ways. Most of our mediums are women. Most of our churches are run by women. There have been notable exceptions, but generally that's the way it's been. And you can go back 100 years, and some of the driving forces way back then, Emma Harding Britton, for instance, a very, very strong woman. So he's looking at it from the point of view of actually women coming out, doing things, whereas instead of just staying at home looking after children, there is a strong feminine background to our philosophy. So he's looking at that. But if we go back a little bit further, I mean, and you look at it historically, there's always been spiritualism in a sense. People have known since we were in caves that their dear departed hadn't just suddenly disappeared and ceased to exist.
Yes.
They knew, in a sense, that somehow they still went on. All that spiritualism has done, in a sense, is formalise a lot of this. And it did it at a time when the Industrial Revolution was going on. The world was switching out of the Christianity that had been, so talking about the Western civilization, they'd been embedded in Christianity for a couple of thousand years. And this movement of being rational, came along with the Industrial Revolution, and so spiritual matters were being pushed into the background as though we became very materialistic. So just at that time, spiritualism was born. 1848 is the date given to it because of the Fox sisters in America. And it spread very, very quickly, because by 1870, what is now the Victorian Spiritualist Union was actually formed. In a matter of, 22 years from its raw beginnings, from America all the way across to Australia, all of a sudden we got spiritualism being formed here in Australia. So historically, that's why it's come about. The basic teachings, all we're on about is trying to teach people that death is not the end of all things, that people actually go on. What the sense of themselves, what they call themselves, actually continues on beyond the death of the physical body. If you had to put the teachings of spiritualism in a nutshell, that's it. If you want to add a little bit to it, you can say, well, we know where these people go and we can communicate with them, because all they've done is to shift dimensions. They've gone out of their physical bodies into a dimension where you don't need a physical body, but it is still possible to communicate with these people. And there's been many, many experiments have been carried out to say that this is so. Now, we as a movement do not look for converts. We find that people come to us when they're ready to understand what we're on about.
Yes.
And so we don't stand on street corners proclaiming our good news, or whatever you might call it. People somehow get to hear about us, and we find that by the time they come to our churches, they're ready to try and understand something new about life. But a lot of them come because they've had experiences. They've seen things that they don't understand, and so they come and ask questions about what it is that they've experienced. A lot of them come along because they want a new way of looking at the world from a spiritual perspective, to shift out of their materialistic paradigm into a more spiritual paradigm. There's a lot of reasons why people come into spiritualism.
Yep. So, I mean, near-death experiences are reported in many different cultures way back into recorded history. Psychic phenomena occur everywhere. If you actually, just ask the average person, just, colleagues, friends, family, you find that, 1 in 2 people have had these experiences.
Yes, in fact, I have a friend who's had one of these experiences, and he's about as materialistic as you can get. He's an engineer. Yeah. And I asked him to write down the experience, and it was interesting. It was a classical near-death experience. He was told that if he went through that door, he wasn't coming back.
Yeah.
Basically, and he said, well, I've got a wife and 2 kids, 2 sons, and they're at a stage in their life when they really need guidance from a father, and I really do feel I have to go back. As nice as this place is, I need to go back. So it's good that he's come back, because we regularly have a hamburger together. That's what we do. And we chat about these things. Look, the near-death experience, I was listening to one of the first people to talk about this was a gentleman, a Dutch gentleman by the name of doctor by the name of Van Lommel, is his name. Now, this fellow is a heart specialist. Way back in 1968, when they started experimenting with using electric shock to restart hearts. One of the first successful restarting of a heart that he had, this gentleman had died, and they basically resuscitated him. He came back, and they were expecting him to be very grateful that they said, and he said, "Why did you do that?" I was perfectly happy where I was. Thank you very much. Why did you bring me back? And he was shocked. He was totally shocked by this, and it started a lifelong interest in the near-death experience, and he's one of the pioneers of that experience. And he's still around today, and you can see on YouTube he has some videos, and he's just provided an awful lot of scientific data, and we're talking about real hard data here, to the point where it has now become obvious that the brain and the mind are two different things. And I think the research done by a contemporary of his, Dr. Sam Parnier, and a neuropsychologist, Dr. Peter Fenwick, in Southampton, England. They've been doing similar studies over there, again, gathering data. Now, I first heard of these people in 1995, so we're going back quite a long way, and these people have been at it since then. They'd already had some preliminary results in 1995. They've got so much data now that I think the Medical Association in the United Kingdom has officially recognised that the mind and the brain are two separate things. So the mind can exist without a functioning brain. I know that going back to my out-of-body experiences, which both happened on a Saturday afternoon. In those days, I used to sleep in the bungalow at the back of our house. That's where my bedroom was. And I was getting some, because I'd been out fishing all night, so I was very tired, and I wanted to go out Saturday night, as you do, go out to a dance or something like that. That's what you did in those days. So I was getting some sleep, and then I found myself in the backyard, looking out at the world when my body was in the bungalow asleep. Twice that happened. So I know that the mind and the mind can exist of itself. What annoys me is that I didn't have the presence of mind to actually have a good look at myself when I was out there. Did I have feet? Did I have a body? All I can remember is being able to perceive. I could hear, I could see, I could smell. And what I remember about that is I've always had good eyesight until now. I'm getting old. In those days, I had excellent eyesight. But the eyesight that I had when I was disembodied was just another magnitude again. I was looking at a fly at about a distance of 2 or 3 meters, and I could see the veins on its wings.
Yeah.
But that's how clear I could see. Absolute crystal clarity. Unbelievable. And I remember that quite clearly. But what I don't remember is whether I was actually looking for eyes, because I can't remember focusing on my body at all. But all my senses were out there in the backyard.
When these experiences happen spontaneously like that, they especially if they happen without preparation, without expecting it to happen, without doing any work towards it, it can be like suddenly moving from one world into another, and you don't really know how to go about it, and what questions to ask, and which avenues. Look, I had very interesting dream life from a very young age, and it's very difficult to know what to make of it. You know, I was raised in a religious family, so I interpreted through the lens of my upbringing. And then when I became a teenager, I became interested in psychology and started reading a little bit. So I had precognition through dreams at a very, very young age, and flying dreams and astral travel, all that kind of stuff. The precognition was an interesting thing that from a very, very young age, I would dream of things before they happened. And it stopped for a little while in my early adult life, and then once I became involved in spiritualism, it started up very regularly. It's one of those things that connects the inner world. So my voice is not quite right. I've been quite unwell.
I know.
It's one of those things that connects the inner world with the outer world. It gives you tangible proof, which brings us back to one of the things that spiritualism is specific in that it's designed to give people real evidence of the supernatural. So a lot of people who follow a religion believe through faith and through culture, through family, upbringing, and conditioning, for better or worse. What we're trying to do with mental mediumship and physical phenomena mediumship is give people direct, tangible evidence. There's obviously other ways to do that. There's scientific ways to do that with parapsychology and studies of near-death experiences and so forth. But for example, the first time I went and the first time I got the first several times I got healing done, the healers actually gave me readings at the same time.
Oh yeah.
And very, very specific information. I was up in New South Wales, and no one there knew who I was. I didn't know anybody, and I went for healing with somebody, and this lady gave me very, very specific information. Not even my closest family or friends would have been able to recall this kind of detail.
We don't ask people, when people come to our churches, we don't ask them to just straight out believe what we say.
Yeah.
But we say to them that you should consider what we say, give it consideration, because if you come to the church often enough, sooner or later you'll get the proof that you need.
Yes.
We're not a faith religion at all. We're more a philosophy, a way of understanding life is what we're on about. And true understanding that life, you understand, well, most people, when they understand that they're more than just physical bodies, they want to know more. They join meditation groups, and as you know, once you join a meditation group, all sorts of things can happen.
Yeah.
I've been asked, just going back a bit, I've been asked by people about these experiences that I've had. How did you have these experiences? And look, all I can say is the experiences come. That's what they do. I've never had an experience. I've never had an experience when I've set out to have an experience. All the experiences I've had have come out of the blue, basically, when I least expected them, or wasn't specifically looking for them. So in meditation, you're going to meditation. Well, every now and then you'll get this wonderful connection with the divine, the bliss and all of that. It certainly doesn't happen every time. In fact, I could count on one hand the number of times that it's happened in my life. But those particular instances have been remarkable. Now, there are in-between states. If I go into a forest, for instance, or a river, as you know, I'm a fly fisherman, quite often there, I've stopped and just look around me, and the mind shifts out of a normal state. You see almost through a different set of eyes. It's hard to explain, but the life around you all of a sudden becomes so much alive. And sometimes I wonder where you wonder whether you make this stuff up, but you can actually see things around the trees, and you see these energies, like little filaments of light coming out of things. It's just very, very strange. So, but that's not a full-on out of this world experience. That's just sort of a halfway shifting out of your normal self experience. I can do that fairly easily given the right conditions. What I can't do is to bring on those really profound experiences. What I've said to people is you can't look for the experience. All you can do is prepare yourself to have that experience. And you prepare yourself through learning to meditate and learning to create a quiet space inside your mind where these experiences can unfold for you. Now, whether they do or not is not really, I don't think, up to yourself.
Yeah, it's always an act of grace.
It's organised higher up, and if you need to have them, you'll have them.
Yeah, I feel that one of the important steps on the spiritual path is to love clarity and clarity and right living more than you love bliss. It'd be very easy for that spiritual ecstasy to become a form of pleasure seeking, and that can be something that can take one away from the actual purpose of spirituality. So a lot of people try shortcuts to heighten and to bring on those experiences.
In the end, it's how you deal with people in the real world. The spirituality, in my view, is a means of making you more sensitive. I mean, you could take this to the nth degree. Look at the life of the Buddha, who was a prince in a castle, and one day he went out in the real world and saw the suffering there, and thought, well, how can this be? So he became attuned to the plight of people outside of his own self. Now you can be so focused on the self that you forget about the world out there. And a lot of people who seek spiritual advancement or spiritual knowledge often focus so heavily on themselves, they forget that a lot of spiritual attunement, as far as I can tell, is about other people as well, becoming more aware of what other people are going through and what their lives are. For instance, I mean, I've been through depression. Now you could say, well, that's a terrible thing to go through. It is, but it makes me very, very sensitive to people who go through similar experiences. So I know what they're going through, and my heart immediately goes out towards them. It's not something because you've had that experience. Yeah. Spirituality is, you can make it a very selfish endeavour. To me, all I wanted to do was to give back. I wanted to serve. And the only way I could do that was through the VSU. And I'm very, very happy to have been given that opportunity to do that. I met so many wonderful people. And in the end, it's what it's about. You meet people, you talk, you discuss. And I've learned a lot from speaking to other people.
Yeah.
Even people who disagree with me.
Yeah.
Because in the end, you have to take on board, these are real people. They've got real views in life. And although you might disagree with them, you need to understand why. Yeah. One of the things I try to do is to listen to people who disagree with me. So I think that's important because you never know. I might be wrong. You've always got to have that little bit of doubt about what your belief systems are, where you're coming from, where you're going. And if you have that little bit of doubt, you'll always admit a little bit of information. For instance, I listen to skeptics talk about our philosophy. I listen to them because I want to hear where they're coming from. And it's very important to know how they think in order for you to be able to talk to them or talk to people who are skeptical. So all these things help to understand people and things.
I agree. I was going to raise a point. So one of the criticisms that gets launched against spiritualism is that a lot of people think that development of psychic abilities is always something done for egotistical reasons, like people want to have power over other people, they want to be special, they want to have magical abilities, so forth. That may be true in some cases. You know, you hear of people who are into the occult who just specifically want to attain powers and they want to find shortcuts. It's really not true of spiritualism as a whole in our experience, because in spiritualism, people develop these capacities specifically for the purpose of serving and for personal growth. And the two go hand in hand. They're really inseparable.
Yes, we're in our spiritualism course. I do session 3, and one of the things that I say about people who want to become mediums, I said, well, why do you want to become a medium?
Yeah.
You need to ask yourself that question. What am I going to do with this ability? And I say to them that you should understand that if you're going to become a medium, it is because you're going to become a servant of spirit. We serve them. Now, we give people readings and we give people proof of survival, and we do that in order to open them up, to try and open them up to a wider view of life. Now, there is a money angle to it, of course, because some people are actually hooked on readings. All they want to do is have readings, and they'd have 50 readings a week if they could afford it. So you need to be able to control this. Even at a personal level, if you're a medium and you do readings, you'll be doing that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if you were doing it for nothing. So you need to be able to control it. But on the other hand, as I say to people, there are people in real need who do need readings and often cannot afford them. And in those situations, you serve. You just simply serve. You give what you can without any thought of recompense. Now, I have, as you know, I'm not short of $1 or two. And because I'm not, and the universe has seen fit to keep me reasonably comfortable in that way, I never charge for readings. I never have. I don't see the need for it. A lot of my services, and I still do some as a reverend, quite often I don't charge at all. To me, it's more about being a servant than anything else. And we get accused of all sorts of stuff. And you've got to understand there's a lot of people out there who abuse these things, and that's always going to be the case. Any philosophy will always have a negative side to it. You look at Christianity. I mean, they have devil worshippers. It's the negative side of. They have people who run churches purely to make money. No other reason than to make money. And I won't go into examples because people know that there are examples of that, so there's no need to do that. But in spiritualism, we try and avoid all that sort of stuff by the way that we structure the churches. Certainly, the VSU is accountable to its members, and it's also accountable to the government. Every year, we have to produce a report of where the money has come from and where it's going to, and all that sort of stuff. And that report is available to members, and it goes through an accountant. It's all done very legally, I'll put it that way.
Yeah. There's no such thing as a perfect religion, or because every organization is made up of human beings which are inherently flawed. The challenge then is to try to structure an organization in a way that tries to prevent these things from happening, or at least allows you to see them if they start to develop, and catch them early before they get too big.
It's a problem with spiritualism because the VSU doesn't have control. There's nothing to stop anybody from opening up a spiritualist church. There's nothing to stop them from calling themselves a reverend, for instance. Now, they're not real reverends, but there's nothing to stop you from tacking REV in front of your name. Okay, there's no legal impediment to do that. You can't act as a reverend. You can't go around marrying people. That's illegal because you're not a real reverend. You don't have a number. But in reality, there's nothing to stop somebody from just opening up a spiritualist church that is not under our umbrella. The VSU has associated churches that are under our umbrella, and they meet certain requirements. But there are people outside of that, and we have absolutely no control over them. And they do what they do. Now, most of them are fine. I can't think of any, in my experience, I can't think of a church that I would have said to somebody, no, steer away from that. But the possibility is always there. People starting a church purely for their own aggrandizement.
Yeah.
Make feel good.
So if you think about world religion as a whole, comparative religion as a whole, spirituality as a whole, so we have a lot of overlap with the religions and the spiritual practices of many different faiths.
Yeah.
Have some distinct differences.
Well, the one that we're closest to, I think, is Buddhism. The Buddhists don't ask you to necessarily believe what they say. They'll say, well, this is what I have found. And actually, even the Buddha said that himself. He said, believe not what any man tells you. You can use it as a useful hypothesis. Okay, sounds good. Sounds like a good thing to do. Yep, okay. But you need to sort that out in your own mind for yourself. In the end, you need to have the experience of that. This is why I find spiritualism really, really great. Because nobody pushes you to become a spiritualist. You sort of, after you've had the experiences and after you understand the philosophy, you choose yourself to become a spiritualist because you've got enough information and enough experience. In Buddhism, it is similar. A Buddhist monk will tell you if you focus on this issue and you meditate on this, you will find that this sort of thing tends to happen. Now, go off and do your meditation and come back to me and see what you find. And it's all based on experience. So that's Buddhism. I find Hinduism is not that. I think Buddhism is actually born out of Hinduism.
Yes.
I find the Hindus really marvelous to listen to. I think of the people on the planet who have really gone where no other people have gone before, I think some of these Hindu mystics really something else.
That's the path that really appeals to me the most. Yeah.
Yeah. We have the West has a strange view of Hinduism. They think that they believe in hundreds of gods.
There's one passage in the Vedic text which says something about there being millions of gods. But if you actually look at Hindu religious practice and find out how many gods people believe in, you might get maybe a couple dozen, maybe 100 at the most. And the reality is most Hindus are actually monotheists or monists. They believe in one supreme being, and they believe in an emanation of subordinate divine beings that serve. So the most orthodox Hindu view is of Advaita Vedanta, which says that not only is there one God, but not only is there only one God, but there is only God.
Yes.
Everything is God. So the entire universe is God's dream. It exists within the mind of God. So it's not only is there one God, there is only God. So that's even a more extreme form of monotheism than the Western kind of idea of it.
Indeed. And I have to agree with them. I think there's only, as they would put it, there's only one real reality, and that is the Brahman. They call it the God. The rest is just emanations from that. And one of them was, I was listening to one of these gurus talking about their local gods. He said, well, we just make them up as we go along because they're useful. I mean, think about that. What they're doing is they're saying, well, there's a river down there, and that river is part of the divine. So how are we going to interpret that divinity for this particular place in this particular time? So they create a divine figure for it. which you could call a god or a goddess. Now, they clearly understand what they're doing. They're not silly. But they've just created a god, a local god. And to me, it makes sense. I wouldn't do it myself, but it certainly makes sense.
I've heard that the Christian missionaries were very frustrated when they went to India because they were trying to tell all the Indians not to worship their own gods, but they had to worship Jesus. And the Hindus are like, great, Jesus sounds great. We'll add him to our list. And the missionaries are like, no, you don't understand. You don't understand. You have to only worship Jesus. They're like, no, you don't understand. We like Jesus. Jesus is cool. We like him. He sounds like Krishna. He can be in our pantheon. Yeah. So Christian.
Yes. Jesus is so much like Krishna that I think they made up stories about Jesus going to India to try and, as a method of saying, well, this is how he knew all this stuff. He must have gone to India. But the truth is that the Christians just adopted any thing that sounded reasonable.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of sayings in the New Testament that you can trace back to the philosophy of the time.
Yeah.
Stoic philosophy, the wisdom sayings of Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. Yeah, all that sort of stuff. They just put those words in there to make Jesus sound like a typical Greek god.
Yeah, well, we can come back to this point. I'd like to discuss so those of us that are raised in a Western culture, which is most people these days that will be listening, have been raised with the overall assumptions of Christianity. That is that there is one religious path that's okay, and then all the other ones are heretical or evil. So the Abrahamic faith, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in particular, have a very, very strict exclusive kind of view of their own faith in relation to others. There are other examples of religions across the world that have this kind of exclusivity, but the three Abrahamic faiths are unique in that regard, or fairly distinct. And that's been a kind of an overall kind of assumption behind religion for anyone in a Western culture. So what we do in spiritualism is denounced by Christianity as being the devil's work.
Yes, and it is a bit sad because I have found, as I watch YouTube a fair bit because I look at a lot of documentaries and things like that, but I run across these Christian prophets, they call themselves, and I've been listening to them. I mean, one of them, Perry, yeah, had an experience of a little baby touching his wife's miscarriage. A couple of years later, he has an experience of a child touching his leg. It's a real physical experience. Okay, and he had a lot of other experiences to go with that. You could almost call all of these experiences that he had straight out of the Spiritualist Handbook.
Yeah.
Okay? He had people telling him about their grandmother, who's deceased on the other side, seeing a child growing up there who was, and this child said, "I am the daughter of Perry Stone." Now, what are these people doing up in the heaven worlds? They can look after a child. I mean, when you die, according to Christian theology, you're supposed to be in the ground waiting for the trumpets to blow.
There's actually three different there were three distinct different views in early Christianity on resurrection and the heavenly life. So there was those that strictly believed that the body was buried and then you had to wait till the general resurrection for the body to be resurrected. And then there was the Gnostic Christianity in general preached a spiritual afterlife. And the Catholics kind of conflated the two, and they came up with this idea that the spirit goes to heaven or hell before the general resurrection, before the last judgment, and then is reunited with the body at the general resurrection. So I think they actually conflated the two.
Yeah. Yeah, you look at Gnosticism. I've looked at Gnosticism a fair bit. Took if you took Jesus and Gnosticism, Jesus was actually a spiritual guide more than a real person. We believe in guides in our philosophy. If you took Jesus as a spiritual guide, you could almost say that spiritualism is Gnosticism in a way, because the way it was structured. And again, in Gnosticism, women have very, very high roles. They're often priestesses and often ran churches themselves. Very, very much like spiritualism. But they had one guide that was the big guide, and that was Jesus. Jesus was never a physical being to them. He was a spiritual person, a spiritual entity. So in spiritualism, we have personal guides. But apart from that, very, very similar teachings to Gnostic Christianity.
One of the great disputes between Gnostic Christianity and what became known as Orthodox Christianity was that what was deemed to be authoritative. Gnostic Christianity viewed spontaneous revelation as being its form of authority, whereas what we now know as Orthodox Christianity was very wanted to create strict hierarchies and fixed dogmas. So there's actually a number of the Gnostic Gospels. I think it's the Gospel of Judas and the Gospel of Mary in particular. They basically argue for the superiority of spontaneous revelation. And so you see this dialogue going on between these alternate forms of early Christianity. So because of that emphasis on spontaneous revelation, Gnostic Christianity kept on changing, kept on evolving, always new versions emerging, whereas Orthodox Christianity wanted to cement itself, wanted to cement fixed doctrine and regulate and control other churches in that regard. So there was a battle, there was a bit of a war, theological war, so to speak, that went on there.
Yes, and in doing that, in solidifying your belief structures, unfortunately, what happens in the end is that your belief structures have to change as new information comes in, and the church has always found it very, very hard to adapt to the times because of those belief structures. Whereas in spiritualism, we say that we are a progressive philosophy, and I'll give you a specific example of that. When I came into spiritualism, the 7 principles were quite different. The first principle said, we believe in the fatherhood of God. Now, think about that. We believe in the fatherhood of God. And when I became president of the Ringwood East Church, I thought, well, this doesn't make much sense, does it? The fatherhood of God. Is God a father? Is God a he, for a start? Are we supposed to envisage this thing as a male? Really? Is that who we are? And yet when you look at the teachings of Silverbirch and all the other teachers in our philosophy, they don't call God a he or father. They might refer to a principle that acts like a father, but never is defined in that way. So it was me who redefined the 7 principles. The 7 principles that you see at the moment of the VSU, that Ringwood East, those words actually created by myself. Now, what other philosophy in the world would have had the gumption to redefine or reword all of those 7 principles in modern terminology? Nobody else could have done it. Everybody else would have gone crazy and said, you can't change that. It's history. But I say to people, but are you seriously going to tell me that we're going to tell our congregation that God is a father, a sort of a human being, the typical white man with a beard living in the sky type stuff? You would have got away with that a couple of years ago, but certainly not now. Surely we've moved beyond that. We have. So I'm quite happy to report to you, it was a 2-year process to do that. And there were a number of people who were very unhappy about having to do that, but eventually it was done. So we were able to move the philosophy into the 21st century, basically, where what do we say? The first principles now, we believe in the divine spirit, the divine spirit of the universe, whom we call God. So there's no concept of it being a human being or a human at all. It's a spirit. Even, yeah, depending on how you define spirit, but I would say it was actually more than that. But that's one step closer to the truth, I think.
Yeah. So the male and female ideals of God as being a father, mother, they're useful analogies, but they're not absolute truth. And obviously, human beings have invested too deeply, taken them too literally in the past, which have been quite problematic in various ways. I mean, I think they're quite useful analogies as long as you don't take them literally. But that tendency to take them literally, as I said, yeah, it's been very problematic. It's been very rigid.
Well, if you look at the Torah, the Old Testament, you'll find that a lot of it has been mistranslated. In fact, the Jews used to worship the female deity as well, Asherah. So there was Yahweh and Asherah, and you'll find those little statuettes in the old temples. Now they wrote Asherah out of the when they turned it into a monotheistic religion.
Yes.
And they did that in order. Who was it? It was King Messiah.
So yeah, just before the Babylonians came along.
Yeah, just before the Babylonians came along, and he did that because he had the 12 tribes of Israel. He wanted to be the king, and he wanted to be the king over a lot of them. So he said, "We'll have one God, and we'll have one king."
He did do one good thing though. He eradicated human sacrifice.
Yes.
So yeah, as you were referring to, the mainstream academic view on Judaism is that it wasn't some distinct religion from the Canaanite religion, but it actually was an evolution of the indigenous Canaanite religion. The Hebrews were Canaanites. They sacrificed their firstborn sons to Yahweh, and they worshipped Asherah as well. There's a text in the Ugaritic text which refers to a Yah being the son of El, one of many sons of El. So it's not conclusive, but scholars believe that the Yahweh was one of many gods in a pantheon. That was the son of the supreme god El, and eventually, when these texts were redacted, they kind of conflated the two. El and Yahweh became the same. But the evidence of the original Canaanite theology is there in the text. I mean, that you still have texts in their law books that gives the legal kind of justification for human sacrifice. And then you have these other verses saying, "But don't do that." You still have the logic for human sacrifice without the actual practice of it. So why would you have texts that justify the logic of it if you didn't actually practice it?
Indeed. In fact, I believe that the ancient Jews actually a lot of their worship was pagan. If you look at what they were worshipping, you'll see they were worshipping the planets in the form of deities of one sort or another. But these deities represented the different planets, Venus and Mars and all those planets that we. And that's no different to what the pagans were doing. It's clearly written in I think First Kings and Second Kings. If you read through that, you'll find verses in there that are condemning that practice, which means that the practice, and it says that this practice has been going on for generations. So we're talking hundreds of years, and possibly going back to the beginnings. It's all there. But now we don't do that anymore, and this is what we do.
Yep.
But there's no doubt that the roots were pagan.
So one of the reasons why Christianity and the other Abrahamic faiths denounce spiritualism is that there's at least one passage in the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Old Testament, which says that you shouldn't basically you can't visit mediums. It's an abomination, and you should be put to death.
Yes, but I think you've got to be careful of that. You're jogging my memory, and I'm just going by a vague memory that I have. But that particular verse is mistranslated from the original Hebrew, and it was put in there because the King James, because this is the King James version of the Bible, he wanted to put in something in there specific about that. So they found a way of doing that. So whether it was inserted in there, or it was a verse was taken from the Hebrew text that was translated in a way that gave that particular idea, I forget. It was too long ago. But,
looking at that, I've never been told that I've never heard that was a mistranslation before. I was on the understanding that up to a certain point, the Hebrew religion was actually quite materialistic. They believed that the righteous were rewarded by God with a long life and many wives and many heads of cattle, many children, and so forth. And they believed that the grave was the wages of sin. Essentially, they believed in a long life and a wealthy human life as being the reward of righteousness, and being death as being the reward of being the consequences of apostasy. So, and then the actual beliefs in a supernatural afterlife kind of developed in a later period. Obviously, there were other religions at the time which believed in an afterlife, but from earlier books in the Bible aren't exactly clear about that.
No, they're not. Absolutely not. But I find it, just a thought came to me as we were talking about that these three religions that sprung out of the Old Testament, the Abrahamic religions, they all require you under severe penalties, some of them, to believe in their religion. And
Yes.
I've always felt that when you have to threaten people with all manner of dire consequences if you don't believe in their religion, that all that tells me is that there's not much truth in it. They're trying to hide something. And the more dire the consequences, the less truth there is in those religions, or the more they've got to hide. That's the way I look at it. And if you look at the extremes of that, with Christianity, you go to hell. They've somehow got this idea, I was a Christian once. Let's not forget that. And I try to be a good Christian, but alas, my mind is too logical. And when I looked at the idea, for instance, the idea of being forgiven. In the old days, if you were a king or a noble, you'd have a priest next to you. They'd go along with you wherever you went. So you could sin and do everything that you wanted. And as you're laying there in your last gasp, you say, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. And bless you, my son. I'll go straight to heaven." But it doesn't matter what you've done throughout your whole life. Providing in the last minute you asked for forgiveness and it was granted by the priest, that was it. You're in heaven.
On that point, I believe a lot of organized crime families are quite religious in that sense. They all go along to church and they believe as long.
You've got to remember the Catholic Church sold indulgences for hundreds of years. Now, indulgence was just a piece of paper signed by your local priest or pope, depending on how much money you wanted to pay. And basically, it granted you forgiveness for a sin that you were going to commit. So if you wanted to commit adultery, you just got a piece of paper from the local priest, you paid your money, and you had the review.
It wasn't just retrospective, it was actually in advance. So you'd actually plan a sin, so to speak. You pay in advance.
Well, this is the reason, this is one of the big reasons why Martin Luther King created that split in Christianity. He was protesting, one of his big protests was the fact that the church was selling these things, and he said, well, how can you do that? This is clearly untenable. This is not the way we should be going. And you notice that Protestants don't do that, and that practice actually stopped. I'm not sure when it stopped, but it did stop in the Catholic Church. But they used to sell these things, indulgences. So they had power over everything. And the other thing that used to get me was, these people, and there are some very, very good people in the world who are not religious. Let's face it. I have friends that are wonderful, wonderful human beings, but they don't go to church.
Yeah. So I think that near-death experiences give a very consistent and coherent view on both divine compassion and divine justice. They give a really balanced perspective on both. They give absolute unconditional love without any exceptions, compassion for everything and everyone, absolute grace. But that's different to the consequences of actions. And they also, at the same time, simultaneously teach absolute accountability. We hear when people have a life review and they have to experience the consequences of every little thing they did to other people, and they see the flow on the consequences of everything, every action, every word, every intention, even every thought.
And you would think that is exactly what you need in order to understand what you have done and in what way you need to change.
Yes.
In what way. It makes all perfect sense to me. I look at my friends who are not religious in any way, and they're wonderful human beings.
Yes.
They're absolutely wonderful human beings. And again, if the near-death experience teaches us anything at all, and if my experiences, I'm far from being perfect. Okay? Far from being perfect. And yet I've had these experiences of divine love. Yeah, we can all put our hands up to that. I've had these experiences of divine love where I'm struggling for words.
Yeah. In deep meditation, you are perfect in a sense, because you're not the personality that makes mistakes. The human personality that makes mistakes, that sins, is absent in those mystical experiences.
Oh, thank you, James. That's a wonderful way of putting it. I must remember that. But I think you're right, because it cuts through that as well. It cuts through to the son of what I call the Son of God energy. That in the end, we're all sons or daughters of God in our essential nature, and we've taken on this persona in order to experience life here in the physical plane. So we're all divine, but our persona, the people that we think we are, is not perfect. But the experience that we have when we connect to those higher energies, and perhaps may I give you an example of that? One of the meditations that I had, which was very, very profound. Enough of my head was left intact to be able to remember. There I was somewhere in the astral planes, and this group of 8 beings, these blobs of light, 7 of them, and I was the 8th, and I said to them, "You've got to be kidding. You mean I'm part of this group of 8?" They said, "Yes, you are. You're one of us." I said, "Okay, if you say so." Now, they did something, I don't know what they did. We were sitting in a circle, and somehow they shifted up a level. So we're beyond personalities now, beyond the astral planes. I'm not sure how they did it, but they facilitated that particular, and leaving enough of me intact so that I can sort of remember what this thing was all about. We're sitting, and I got the sense that the whole universe lay at my feet, and I could actually build a mountain here, put a river there. I know it sounds crazy. And then out of all this, because we're living in a sort of a bright space, and one area of it became very, very bright. And we understood this to be a manifestation of the divine essence in that space. And all it was brightening of the space. And the love that came through with that, we just fell on our knees, all of us fell on our knees. We don't, now, blobs of light don't have knees, but you understand what I mean.
When I hear people who say
you're outside the area of personality at that point.
Yeah, I don't understand when people say they believe in God, but then they don't love everyone. You know, my little experiences of the divine are so all-consuming that you just want to share it with everyone and everything. You know,
what I find though is that some people are simply tuned out to it. They don't want to know, and it's best to leave those people alone. They're not interested. I have friends. They know damn well who I am. They're just not interested at all.
Yeah,
they're still my friends. I go fishing with them, and if the subject ever comes up, I'll explain to them what it is that needs to be explained. But beyond that, I'll wait for them to ask. I think it's a better way of doing it. I don't want to sound preachy towards them. You know what I mean? It's I have left it open for them to ask, and anytime they want, but I leave it with them to do that.
Yeah. The experience for me is it leaves you with a deep sense of humility. If you look at how flawed each one of our own personalities is, who are we to judge anyone else?
Yes, it's one of the things I say in the spiritualism course. But in the end, if you think all of this spiritual advancement is about yourself, then something's gone wrong. Because it's not about yourself. It should engender inside you a sense of humbleness, humility, and a sense of wanting to serve. That's what spirituality, opening up spiritually, does to you. There's a sense of wanting to do something, wanting to serve somehow, wanting to help in whatever way. I mean, we all have different attributes. We're all different, but if you think that spiritual attainment is about working out a way of making more money by becoming a guru of some sort, well, no, that's not what it's about at all. You've lost the plot somewhere.
Now, Domenic, you know a lot about scientific investigations of spiritualism. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, if you go back, a lot of scientists have been involved, actually, in testing physical phenomena mediums. And these days, we've had some testing done on our mental mediums, our mediums. Let's start with physical phenomena first. You can probably go back to Sir William Crookes, probably the best known of those. Now, Sir William Crookes was a great scientist. He didn't become Sir William for no reason. And he tested the great physical phenomena medium, Daniel Hone, in his laboratory in London. He wrote up the details of the experiment and had them published in the Quarterly Journal of Science. I think the year was 1876. He was young at the time, and of course his contemporaries said to him, well, you've either been fooled or you've gone mad, so take your pick. And he said to them, Mr. Hone is still in London, and he's quite happy to be tested by you. And they said, we wouldn't waste our time. Now, sadly, this is the scientific establishment, academia, if you like to put it that way. It's the typical reaction of anything, any idea that's put forward that is outside their realm of understanding. What I call the sphere of knowledge. If you're outside of that. Now, true enough, outside of that, you get some cranks. Lots and lots of them. And you've got to be careful of that. But you do get kernels of truth, which they simply will not investigate. So that's one of the problems that we have with the scientific world is their skepticism is just off the planet.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't even test it. Here's a man who's capable of changing your entire view of life, because he could float around the room, this guy, like St. Joseph of Cupertino. Like, if it's possible to float around the room weightless, it's not just spiritualists that do it. So St. Joseph of Cupertino was known as the flying monk. And we're talking about 1605 here, hundreds of years ago. It's quite famous. So these things happen. Anyway, Sir William Crookes wrote and did a lot of experimentation in spiritualism. The other names I could mention is Oliver Lodge, who's credited for inventing radio. Marconi put it to good use, but it was Oliver Lodge who actually invented it, we believe. And Professor Frederick William Myers, who was a friend of Sir Oliver Lodge, they actually created an experiment to prove that spiritualism or life after death was real, because people had so much experience of mediums at the time, so many mediums that were tested. But the theory was always that they're getting this information from some mind on the planet, not necessarily from some mind on the other side of life. Now, how do you prove that? What they did was they made a pact with each other that whoever went to the other side first would organise an experiment to prove conclusively that the information is coming from this kind of entity, not a physical mind here on planet Earth.
Did they then pass around a gun with one bullet in?
No, William Myers died first, and he went across the other side, and he organised an experiment, and they did it through mediums. Okay, so they had half a dozen mediums who were not educated above primary school level. They could barely read and write, these ladies. So we're going back, 130 years, something like that, to the turn of the 20th century, so 1901, about that sort of time. And what he did, he gave half a dozen mediums different texts from the Greek, some of the Greek plays, Greek literature that only somebody who goes to university would know about. Okay, and he gave it to them in different pieces, and he gave the last medium the key on how to put them all together, so that they made logical sense. So what he was saying was that this information could not have come from somebody on the planet. It had to be somebody up above who knew the Greek literature and could instill it in the minds of people who knew nothing about this literature, and then finally have a key on how to put it together in the correct sequence. So it pretty well proved that that information was coming from this kind of entity, not somebody on the planet. So that was the experiment I put together. Possibly the more famous ones, Dr. Albert von Schrenk-Notzing. He did a lot of stuff with a lady that in the laboratory notes was called Eva C. Now, Eva C, that's to maintain, so nobody knew who she actually was, because some of the things that she did were quite remarkable. Eva, she was actually Martha Barode was her real name. We know that now. But what they used to do with her was they would take her to a building, and from there, that building was always the same building. She would go to an address. And then she'll be taken to a second address. That second address always changed. So she had no idea where she was going. So she had no way of organising anything in that particular house. Okay, that was when she got to that second address, there was a nurse there who stripped her totally naked, checked every orifice in her body. to make sure she wasn't hiding anything. She was then given an emetic solution to make her vomit, to make sure she was hiding nothing in her stomach. She was then dressed in a suit that she was sewn into. They would then tie her to a chair, and in a room with 100 candle power of light, so you could see what was happening. You could see the ectoplasm come out of this woman's body, travel across the room, go into a wire gauze cage, wire gauze like a tea strainer, only gas can get through that. And inside this cage, there would be a manifestation of spirit. Real, spirits would appear in physical form and sometimes even speak. And after the seance, that ectoplasm would dissolve and flow back into the medium's body. And she didn't do that once, she did that many, many times. That's one of the famous experiments. The other person who's probably very, very famous, I mean, there are others, but for the sake of brevity, we'll just go to Helen Duncan. During the war, World War II, she used to run seances where spirit would manifest in a cabinet and would walk out, and people in the congregation or audience would recognise these people as dead relatives. Now, quite famously, when the Hood was sunk, the battleship, the pride of the British fleet, was sunk by the Bismarck, I think. The very next day, one of the sailors that was dead came out of the cabinet and spoke to his mother. The mother fully recognised her son, and he said, "The Hood is gone, been blown up." Now, the British Admiralty didn't tell anybody that because they feared that there would be such a loss. People would be very, very upset and would fear for their lives because the Hood going down was a big issue. So they didn't tell the public that. So they considered that this woman was actually a spy, because the only way she could have known was that she was in league with the Germans, who were told her that the Bismarck had sunk the Hood. Now, when she did that a second time for another ship, they took her to court and imprisoned her. And that's what happened to her. Now, when she came out of prison, the prison wasn't a very nice place. She'd actually caught some sort of respiratory problem, which killed her a few years later. Now, her family didn't want to be known as being a family of a traitor. So they spent years and years and years trying to get this changed. And I think it was 1988 or 1986 that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II gave her a royal pardon. Now think about that, a royal pardon. It couldn't come from any higher in our system of government. Now, Helen Duncan, quite famously, would perform on stage in broad daylight and produce manifestations of spirit. You could see the ectoplasm coming out of her mouth, and they form into human forms. Now, the Magicians' Union of the UK was asked, how could you possibly do this? And they said that what she does is she swallows cheesecloth into her stomach, regurgitates it out in the shape of a human being. Now, if you could do that, mind you, no magician has ever done that, but that's the way they say she did it. It's important to note, though, that swallowing cheesecloth and hiding it in your stomach is a form of torture used by the Spanish Inquisition. Would force stuff down people's throats into their stomach to pick up the stomach acid and then bring it back up through their mouths and burn the entire system as it came up. Very, very painful. So apparently she uses a form of torture every time she does this. So that's the, and lastly, I would put forward that there's the Skoll group, of which there is a YouTube video on, called the Afterlife Experiments. For those people out there who want to look at it, it's the one that there's a lot of things out there called the afterlife experiments, but this one goes for an hour and 28 minutes. I think it's the only one that does that. And when it opens up, it'll tell you quite quickly that it's the skull group they're talking about. That's something that you can look at, but it involves a physical phenomena group in 1995 or thereabouts, so it's quite modern. They had 2 scientists and a magician involved with the physical phenomena group, and they pronounced them to be absolutely genuine. All the phenomena that happened, which included some of the stuff that I have seen, and a lot more higher than that. Yeah, so that's a fairly modern one. So, I'm not sure how much time we've got, but there is one more that I would, which is actually part of that video, is a lot of spirit voices now are becoming manifest in electronic equipment. And in that particular video, you'll see a lady whose daughter had passed over due to a car accident. And they had a recording of her voice before she passed over, and the recording of her voice that she'd left on her mother's phone somehow after she passed away. Now, these 2 voices were put through a voice recognition software, which is just a computer crunching numbers. It's totally unbiased. And it came up with a figure of 97%. There's a 97% probability that the 2 voices were the same voice. So if that's not evidence, I don't know what is. Yeah. So there's been a lot of work. I'm just touching the edges of this. I could go on and on. Rudy Schneider, that I haven't even mentioned, is another famous name. There's lots and lots of people. Do you want any more?
I think we're just about out of time. My throat's handle much more talking. Just I would sum up by saying that as you mentioned, the scientific establishment seem to assume that they're unbiased, and that they seem to assume that materialism is a default position. And they presume that anyone with a different position is kind of arguing against the consensus already.
Yes, exactly.
They forget that materialism and philosophical naturalism, metaphysical naturalism, is itself a philosophical position, and the 2 can be actually treated as equal, rather than taking materialism, naturalism as a presumption.
Yeah, I think we should also mention, though, it's not just spiritual matters they do this with. Academia does this with anybody.
Yeah.
Proposes anything that is outside the current sphere. You've only got to look at Egyptology and the archaeological arguments surrounding who built the pyramids and where they come from and all those sorts of things. You look at that and you see a lot of it was banned. A lot of these books on that subject were banned because they didn't go along with that consensus. So they do it to their own people. They do it to their own scientists, talking about real world situations. So if they can do it to them, they will most certainly do it with us. They find it a lot easier to do it with us. It's sad, because science is meant to be about, let's not forget who I am. I'm a technologist. I'm an expert in measuring things, putting systems on the test. And if anything I've been drummed into my mind, it's been that you always follow the data. Even when you don't like where the data is leading you, you can't deny the data. And if you don't like what the data is saying, well, you've got to work out a new explanation for things that takes into account the data, because the data is the data. Sadly, scientists don't do that. They just put the data aside. It doesn't exist. Or you've gone mad. You don't know what you're doing. You're a denier. Whatever. As long as we can get rid of this uncomfortable information. No, it doesn't matter where it comes from. It can come from their own people. And it's, in my view, I can give clear examples of that from the 1800s, the 1950s, and to this day you would think that it would get better, but no, it's got worse. And it's got worse particularly because a lot of research is funded by government. And if you want to get research money, well, then you have to do studies in whatever area the government is interested in having you prove things.
Yes.
Okay? And you won't get funding otherwise. There's a lady on YouTube, a German scientist, who goes on about this all the time. See, I can get funding for useless things, but I refuse to do that, waste my time. Yeah. So the way academia is structured, the way it's financed, and there is just a recipe for disaster. There are, at this moment, I heard several thousand papers that have been written by people in academia that have been retracted. Because they're all nonsense. So this is academia. These are the people that we look to in the world to tell us what the world is all about. The misbehaviour that goes on in that area is just unbelievable. I find it very, very sad. As somebody who's forever searching for the truth and understands what data is and how it's obtained, I find it one of the saddest things that I've had to come to terms with is that these people seem not to care about that sort of thing. They're more interested in promoting themselves.
Agreed.
I think I've gone off topic somehow.
That's fine. Domenic, it's been wonderful to talk to you today. Wonderful to hear you share your wisdom. So thank you for this.
Well, thank you for the opportunity of speaking.
My real pleasure.
Okay, thank you.